Hello, boys and girls. And today we're going to read our second nonfiction book about wiggly earthworms. And that's what it's called, Wiggly Earthworms, No Backbone, the World of Invertebrates, which means that earthworms do not have a spinal column of vertebrae like we do. So you might notice that wiggly is an adjective, and that's a describing word. And there are lots of adjectives that describe earthworms. If you think about the book we read yesterday, you might remember the word slimy. And today we are talking about wiggly. All right. You can't be wiggly if you have a backbone, and earthworms don't have one. Wet and wiggly, two adjectives to describe earthworms. Earthworms are covered with wet, slimy skin. Their long, wiggly bodies have no legs and no bones. Many people think they are gross. Yet earthworms are one of the most important animals in the world. Earthworms are found all over the world, and they can live wherever the soil is not frozen or too dry. Short and long. Two more adjectives. There are about 4,900 kinds of earthworms. The smallest is about 1 inch long. The largest is 12 feet long, about the same length as a big surfboard. And there is an African giant earthworm. And look at that man's hand and how big that earthworm is that he pulled out. Whereas on the other page, that's the size earthworm we're used to seeing. The best known earthworm in the United States is about 6 inches or 15 centimeters long. Many people call this worm the night crawler because it stays underground during the day and comes out at night to eat. And there we see a night crawler. From end to end. So since we know this is nonfiction, those titles tell us a little bit. So I'm guessing this is going to be about from one end of the earthworm's body to the other end of the earthworm's body. An earthworm's body has a head end and a tail end. In between, there are lots of little rings called segments. Each segment has 4 pairs of tiny bristles. The bristles help the worm grab hold of soil as it moves through the earth. And here we can see the cocoon too, which we know earthworms are born out of cocoons. Earthworms have a thick band near their head end. The worms use mucus from this band to make cocoons that hold and protect their eggs until they hatch. We remember we learned about their life cycle yesterday. And so here we see a full illustration of their body. And you can tell the head end because there's a thick band closer to the head end. Remember all these little tiny pieces of earthworm, those are called segments. And then we see the tail end as well. So here is more information about the outside, about the inside of an earthworm. On the inside its body, an earthworm has a tiny brain, 5 pairs of hearts, and a long intestine. The brain controls the worm's movements and helps it sense the world around it. The hearts pump blood through the worm's body. The intestine helps the worm turn food into fuel that its body can use. Some kinds of earthworms have blood that is red, like human blood. The red blood gives the worms their reddish color. And here we can see where their intestine is, their throat and mouth and brain and hearts. And remember, earthworms do not have eyes. So you might notice that this nonfiction book has a lot of the same information from yesterday's book. Underground living, so where they live. Many kinds of earthworms live in underground tunnels. To dig them, the worms push their long bodies through the soil. Some dig tunnels that run just an inch or two below the ground. Others, such as the night crawler, dig tunnels that go deep down into the ground. A nightcrawler's tunnel can be 6 feet or 2 meters deep. By digging tunnels, earthworms help all kinds of plants grow. How? They loosen the soil so that air and water can reach the roots. Yeah. Worm food. So let's see. What do you think that worms eat? You might remember from yesterday, earthworms eat dead leaves and other pieces of rotting plants. They also eat soil seeds and small twigs. They have no teeth, so they suck the food into their mouths. Inside their intestines, the parts that they cannot use are turned into waste called castings. The castings pass out of an opening at the end of the earthworm's tail. And you can see these castings are a rich dark color and they become part of the soil and they have lots of nutrients in them. Some of the food in a worm's intestine breaks down into tiny bits that can help plants grow. These bits make up part of a worm's casting. When a worm leaves its castings behind, the tiny bits go into the ground and make soil rich and healthy. That's very, very helpful for the soil and for the plants that grow in it. Oh, you might remember that some animals eat worms. Worms for dinner. An earthworm's meaty body makes a good meal for many different animals. Robins and other birds pull worms from their tunnels when they come out to eat. Shrews, moles, and other furry animals that live in tunnels hunt them underground. Toads, frogs, snakes, and skunks like to eat earthworms too. And here we can see a frog and a mole eating an earthworm. Moles catch earthworms and store them in their underground homes. Then during the winter, when food is hard to find, the moles eat the worms. So moles actually catch them and store them for winter, just like some other animals do that too with their foods. Getting a grip. An earthworm can't do much to defend itself from enemies that live underground. It can try to save itself from a hungry bird, however. That heading, getting a grip, is making sense. Usually the bird grabs the worm by the head as the worm pokes out of the ground. Using its body and its bristles, the worm grips the sides of its tunnel and holds on tight. Sometimes it wins the struggle and is able to slip back into the earth. So getting a grip means those bristles help the worms grip onto their hole so they don't get eaten by birds. A bird often bites off part of a worm while pulling on it. If the bitten off part is from the head end, the worm usually dies. If the bitten off part is from the tail end, it often grows back and the worm survives. Oh, some more information about how worms are good for the earth. Hundreds of earthworms can live below a small yard or garden. That idea may seem gross, but in fact, it's good news. Earthworms are an important food for birds and other animals. They help plants by bringing air, water, and rich matter into the soil. Earthworms don't just live in the earth, they are good for the earth. Some people raise worms and sell their castings to farmers, gardeners, and stores that sell gardening supplies. The people who buy the castings mix them into the soil to help plants grow. So earthworms are very good for the earth. And if you have a compost pile, you might remember from yesterday, it's good to have worms in your compost. All right, so this just gives us a little more information about invertebrates. And here are 4 worms that are closely related to earthworms, and they are also invertebrates, which means they don't have a backbone the way that we do. You can see a leech, which I didn't know was a type of worm, a clam worm, a potworm, and a marine worm. And this book is also on Epic, so if you'd like to go back and read more parts of it, look at it again, look through the glossary or index because it's a nonfiction book, then please take some time to do that. And I hope you are having a wonderful time and having a lot of fun learning more about worms and how they help us. Bye.